Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about ego as it pertains to spiritual enlightenment. I think this is something that is a good topic for a video, actually. Whether or not it's truthful or loving or beautiful or resonant with your spirituality is a totally separate question. But I think it definitely is, it's an opportunity to create and to riff on something and to explore something. Because it's very relevant in spiritual enlightenment, this concept of ego. It's almost the most relevant concept in spiritual enlightenment conversations, is the idea of a separate self, or a self even, with a lowercase s or an uppercase s, depending on what you prefer, in space and time, to the extent that those even exist. I'm being a little bit facetious, a little bit ironic too here. You know, a lot of people don't pick up my irony, but sometimes I am trying to be funny. I'm still working on that. I'm kind of a bore too, obviously, because I'm so philosophical, but yeah, ego is a funny thing. But it's also a truthful thing too. It's like, what surprises me are people who deny the existence of ego, specifically of their ego, which kind of reminds me a little bit of the meme, didn't do nothing, right? Like, gaslighting 101. You just deny that there's a separate self who did anything. Oh yeah, I just so happened to take this candy from this baby, but because there's no separate self, nothing happened. But then this can be extended into a variety of different ways and then lead to the conclusion that there is no morality, there's no right and wrong, which is ridiculous. Now, we also know that, right and wrong is very much dependent on ego. But that doesn't mean that right and wrong is entirely relative. The fact that some guy went and killed some college students or something like that, I mean, that's wrong. I don't care who you are. Now, if you're looking at it from a God perspective, you're like, okay, well, maybe he didn't have a choice, or maybe they didn't know what they were walking themselves into, or maybe there is no separate self, but it's still wrong. It's still wrong. So I think one of the aspects that I'm trying to drive home here is that you can't be so dismissive of things like morality, even though there is an egoic component to it. Ditto for truth, ditto for love. Morality is actually an aspect of love. Ditto for beauty. Ditto for freedom. Ditto for any other concept or pointer that you may have in spiritual enlightenment. Ultimately, we're just experiencing a dialogue here. You're watching my video, and I'm presenting it to a kind of an abstract, wide public. But I'm talking to you like I would talk to like a really sensitive, curious friend almost, who's just going to let me monologue for 30 minutes, which is next to impossible, right? Those of you guys who are familiar with relationships. So the fact that we make these videos and we do these monologues for like 30 minutes, or some people even do videos for like 3 hours even, that's kind of weird. I mean, I'll just flag that, because nobody communicates that way. If you were to do that to somebody in person, they would walk away, or they would find some way to get out of that situation. It would just be really creepy. So understand right away that, how much the technology of the communication medium influences the presentation of the information. It could be writing, it could be speech, it could be telephone, it could be Zoom, it could be in person, right? So you're listening to me in a video, and I'm giving a talk, which is entirely improvised, about what ego is and why I think ego is important to spiritual enlightenment. So, you see how I like swung back to the top, right? Like if we were doing a jazz performance, like I just went right back to the theme right there. So, you can become conscious of your own individual creation and realize that you are a creator. I've done some videos on this already, but well before beauty, we have to deal with love. And then well before love, we have to deal with truth. Love has to acknowledge ego. Otherwise, it never escapes truth. And you've seen people like this, right? They're extremely unhappy people because they need to be right. They're looking to be right. Now, does looking to be right or looking to be true make you an unhappy person necessarily? I would say no. Because on some level, whatever's happening, it's okay to be here. It is what it is. That's exactly what truth is trying to point to. And so you should accept everything that's happening too. But at the same time, don't throw stuff away that you shouldn't throw away. And I'm going to argue one of the things that you shouldn't throw away is ego. It's the separate self. It's the movie. It's the you're an artist. You're a conscious creator. But you're also a creation within Maya or within the movie or within experience. Just as much as you are consciousness or some kind of abstract or spiritual being of sorts, and then not even. Or maybe it's you don't even think that there is a separate self or something like that because you're trying to preserve a community, right, of people who think the same way. Well, that's just ego. That's just coloring. It's like coloring in. Right? That's what's happening, is coloring in. And the thing is that's deeply ironic is if you're the person who is against ego, then that's exactly what your ego is. You're the person in reality who's walking around saying there is no separate self. You're putting words like you in parentheses. That's your ego, though. But the weird thing about some of these people, and I don't think they buy this 100%. I think they also know, too, that it's a game on some level. It's a dominance game of trying to win. But ultimately, they know that that's what they do. That's what they create. They create this persona of no self. And so they become like a Neo-Advaita teacher or Advaita Vedanta teacher. And that's fine. I mean, I just look at it like this is what these people create. And they're going to look at me and say, you're a demon because you think that there's a separate self. Or you think that there's a self or something like that. And I'm just going to look at that and go, okay, like from an individual metaphysics perspective, That just tells me that you're trying to control me with your truth. From a collective metaphysics perspective, that tells me that I have to agree with you to become part of your tribe or family or group. Both of those are bad from my perspective as an individual. But if you get beyond truth, and if you have the capability to get beyond truth where you can move into humor, you can actually play around with this kind of dynamic, but other people have to be open to you doing this too. So in other words, like, don't try to force yourself, don't overstay your welcome in a community that's really just not right for you. There has to be some kind of a consensus that that you're not just viewed as a demon or, some kind of person who's just being scapegoated because other people are totally blind to their ego and their shadow. Or they're not, but they pretend to be. It's like a really defensive chess game where it's like, I'm going to pretend like nothing's happening. And this is really weird, like when it comes to morality, because it leads into this, and this is obviously going to be projected onto other people, not the person who's blind to this, but it leads to this kind of mentality like, there's no self that could do anything, so nothing is right or wrong. But where it becomes weaponized is when I apply it to my ego as a defense. So you come at me and you say something like I don't even know, you know what I mean? Use your imagination, but some ethical hypothetical where somebody was hurt or something like that. And that person came to you and said, that's false because there's no separate self. And then you're left going, okay, do I have to agree with you? Or do I trust my own instinct here? And then furthermore, like, why would you be asking me to agree with you in this circumstance? It could be that it's not heavily morally loaded. It could be something simple like, I like strawberry ice cream. There's no separate self that likes anything. Okay, that's fine. That's innocuous. But if it's something heinous, right? Like, I hate to use this example, but that guy who killed those 4 college students in Idaho, right? I got to use a concrete example, right? That is morally wrong. I don't care who you are. I don't care what kind of spirituality you have. That is morally wrong what that guy did to those 4 people. And the thing about me is, generally speaking, I tend to think that I'm an open-minded person, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on some of this stuff. Like, there is stuff that's true. There is stuff that's wrong. There is stuff that's loving or not loving. There is stuff that's beautiful. There is stuff that's free. I mean, this idea that somebody could challenge you and then you're moving back like a crab, with your pinchers, and you're just playing total defense mode while also expressing ego, like that's a very deceptive, covert, kind of narcissistic ego, actually, to be blunt. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not saying anybody has NPD, but I'm just saying that, like, playing super defensive chess doesn't take you off the hook for playing chess. You're still an ego that's playing chess. You're just playing a very covert game of chess. and you're denying that there is such a thing as an ego. Well, how convenient for you to do that. Of course you're going to do that, right? If you're intelligent enough to be this kind of sneaky or crafty. Now, I will say this. I don't really have a problem with people who do this, actually. What I have a problem with is taking them in good faith in the first instance. Because they will make you seem like they're in good faith. But once you realize that this is what they do, there's no more need to judge them as good or evil or whatever. Just like you just know this is the kind of person you're dealing with. And if you decide to continue to relate with them, you can joke around with them or you can play around with them, but don't expect them to agree with you. So you have to get beyond truth. You have to go from truth to love. And love is about getting along with people who differ from you. And in this case, you have a different philosophy than they do about the self. You acknowledge that the concept of ego points to something, and they deny that. So what I want to do in the second half of this video is kind of move into that, because I think now we can really move into like what is the ego as a launching point, and then we can narrow the focus from the first half of this video, which is kind of a broad survey. So just give me 1 second. Okay, friends, welcome back. So let's go through this with a different tack. So we'll just start with the whiteboards that are behind me, right? That are totally blank. I just noticed those. And then my trumpet sitting there. So let's just do something here. Let's create something. So the question is like, what is ego? And is ego something that is bad? Is it something that's good? Is it something that like needs to be corrected? Is it something that is a barrier? Is it something that's false? Is it something that's not loving? Is it something that's beautiful? Is it something that's immoral? Is it something that's not religious or not spiritual? Ego is a pointer. When you go through the process of spiritual enlightenment, you're going to realize that ego is it's a monality. And then the contrast of ego is no ego or no separate self. And that forms a duality. But non-duality goes beyond monality and duality. So ego, it's a pointer. It points to something real that it doesn't completely capture. But what it does point to should not be let me see if I got to figure out a way to do this. What it does point to should be acknowledged. I'm taking judgment out of it because judgment is about state. I'm not talking about state. When I'm talking about spiritual enlightenment, I'm talking about something that is beyond state. It's something that is constantly here. And so spiritual enlightenment is not a concatenation of state, or it doesn't have anything to do with state. But the pointers to this statelessness, are always just going to be pointers. It's like trying to describe like what an M&M tastes like in language to somebody who doesn't have taste buds. that's a weird example, but or trying to like describe what it sounds like to listen to some album in words for somebody who doesn't have hearing. So spiritual enlightenment pointers are all going to be pointers. And they're all going to involve ego. All pointers are going to involve ego. And this is something that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. They don't want to acknowledge that they have an ego. And what is ego? Ego is the separate self. It's exactly what ego is. So when you say there is no separate self, you're denying that you have an ego. And what does that do? That gives you an unconscious ego. I mean, Jung understood this. You become somebody who has an ego that is not acknowledged. Now, you're going to say to me that I'm a demon or devil or whatever because I acknowledge a separate self or something like that, because you got to do that to maintain that social glue that you have with your followers to tell them that we all agree that there is no separate self. And there's pros and cons to that. I mean, like, for example, Neo-Advaita, that's a really good community glue, actually. It leads to a certain kind of love, but it's a love that's based on truth. Like, we all have to agree. We got to do the non-dual handshake. Not the non-dual, the Neo-Advaita handshake, rather. I'm realizing now Neo-Advaita is not non-dual. It's definitely. Neo-Advaita is not non-dual. There's lots of dualities, monalities, teachings. There is no separate self, that kind of thing. So Neo-Advaita is definitely not to be conflated with non-duality. This is something that I've kind of done in the past, and I realize now this is not appropriate. Non-duality is actually a correction to Neo-Advaita, because non-duality would say, just like the highest form of Neo-Advaita, that this is all that's here. This with a capital T. But that also includes the separate self. That includes people who disagree with you. That includes people who think of themselves as people. This includes everything. The problem is that your separate self, your ego, wants to think that anybody who thinks that there's a separate self is a demon. Well, that's just your ego. And that might be the community glue that holds a community together, like a non-dual, not non-dual, but a Neo-Advaita community together, is that we all do the Neo-Advaita handshake, where we say there is no separate self. But that's just community ego, actually. I mean, somebody who is really spiritually enlightened would be beyond on ego on some level. Okay, not entirely, but on some level. They would recognize ego. So if you have a blind spot to even recognizing ego in yourself or in others, then I don't see how you could really be spiritually enlightened. Because you need to realize that all of this spiritual enlightenment work has to do with your experience, your direct experience. And your direct experience is the only thing that's relevant to spiritual enlightenment. And so that, I think, is what direct experience is. It's like, if it's not about direct experience, then what is it about? It's about fantasy. And there's nothing wrong with fantasy. I mean, you're directly experiencing being in fantasy too, right? But then there's times when you're being where you're not thinking of yourself as a self too. And so this is what leads the Neo-Advaita people to want to conclude that there is no separate self, because the thought is not always there. Being doesn't require a separate self to be. But that doesn't mean that there is no separate self. That's just another thought. See, this is something people don't seem to get. There is no separate self is just another, it's a belief. It's a religion, actually. There's nothing wrong with religion. You just got to realize what you're dealing with. And what is being created where. So, for example, this idea that you need to be able to get along with everybody is actually the limitation of love. See, beauty goes beyond love to the extent that even fighting is beautiful. Conflict is beautiful, even though it's unloving. A lot of banter, social banter and humor and comedy is really hostile in nature. But it's beautiful. It brings people together, but it's definitely not love. Love has to do with care. It sits on the shoulders of truth. Like, we have to agree on something to be able to love. But beauty doesn't require that we agree to relate. So there's different... There's different ways that I think about ego or power or causation. But I think ultimately spiritual enlightenment is about liberation. And so it is true that what more could you want than what's happening right now? What you want is a thought or a fantasy. And you've had fantasies in the past too, and there's nothing wrong with fantasies. But also notice this. Notice the not even. People laugh at this. They say, well, you're a Zen devil or something like that. Well, yeah, there's also the Neo-Advaita devil too, or the Neo-Advaita demon. All right, that's often projected on somebody else. But to be fair, most of the time you're not thinking about any of this stuff. And somebody could look at this and go, well, you're not taking spiritual enlightenment serious enough. You think it's so simple. Well, no, it's only simple when you are deeply developed. You don't get to liberation or freedom when you first start out on the path. You're going to be focused on truth. Okay, to even get to love, to even see that love is not the same as truth, already that's a deeper crack that a lot of people don't ever get to, or a deeper pointer. Now, I think it's important to paradoxically accept and also question experience too. So it's not just everything that's happening is fine. There is no morals. There is no good and evil. There is no blah, blah, blah. It's just like, dude, that's just you doing this, you know, just yapping. And you don't realize that you're yapping, you're talking, you're thinking. It's much more complicated than that when you just allow experience to be experience, but then also engage with the concept of the separate self or the ego and think about development of the ego and ways that you can experience reality in a way that's more pleasant and constructive, maybe, or not, right? It just depends on, there's only so much control that you're going to have over this. But I think it's important to want to do this. So it's not like spiritual enlightenment and personal development are severed. It's a duality and not even. Ultimately, it's trying to point to this experience. And this experience isn't wrapped up in thought all of the time. But the thought or the idea that thought can't be relevant to this experience is just another thought. So you have to be able to be free of really everything to be spiritually enlightened too, and then not even. Because that's just more ego. Like, I'm the one who's free and spiritually enlightened. You don't want to attach to that. That's just more truth. You don't need that either. You can be sitting there eating your Cheerios in the morning. You're not thinking about truth necessarily. You might not be thinking about anything. So I think trying to explain spiritual enlightenment is really difficult, but I gave it a good crack in this video. And also trying to explain ego too. And why these oversimplified takes ultimately serve an egoic purpose. It's not about liberation. But then even liberation is going to be a concept, it's going to be a pointer. You know, everything has to come back to direct experience. And even direct experience is a pointer. What the fuck is direct experience, right? We don't even know what direct experience is. We don't care what direct experience is. Most of your day, you're not sitting there thinking about what direct experience is. See? So you always have to go back to what this is with a capital T. This is one of the things I do like about Neo-Advaita, is this concept of this being all that there is. Okay, friends? Hopefully this is a good video. Totally improvised. I'll talk to you in a week. Take care.